This is the thoughtful type. As I'm recording this, it's Sunday, the 27th of September, 2020. My name is the polarizing individual, Mishak R. Brencher. It's been a long time getting round to specifically talking about this, but let's get into it. Autism. I must add as well, it was quite hard finding current day statistics on this, but what I have in front of me basically states 1 in every 160th child worldwide has the condition. In the UK, roughly 700,000 people, children and adults, have it. There's no specific number on how many adults have it, but as far as children, they reckon 0.9% of children, or 90 in every 10,000th child has the condition. Autism comes from the Greek word auto, which basically means self. In essence, autism translates as the isolated self. The term was first coined by Eugen Bleuler in 1908. He was a Swiss psychiatrist. He observed young children who displayed symptoms very similar to schizophrenic patients, but not actually schizophrenia, but they were very isolated from their external environment and had a very intense inner thought process which kind of dictated the whole experience of life. There was more awareness generated in 1943 as American psychiatrist and physician Leo Kanner described some young children with the inability to form contact with others as early infantile autism, and their insistence on the sameness in everything that they experience in life. They were very dependent on familiarity, patterns, anything that was not they weren't accustomed to. They felt under pressure and felt great anxiety. Plus their language and communication was heavily underdeveloped. 1 year later, in 1944, Hans Asperger observed children displaying the same characteristics but on a much milder level. They were very bright, but they had no social skills, and they found it very difficult to hold conversations. They're usually one way, and they had specific areas of interest that they excelled in, and it was vice versa with things they weren't used to doing on a daily basis. This would later become known as Aspergers Syndrome, but it didn't gain prominence until 1981. Lorna Wing, who's a researcher, helped Asperger's become much more recognizable that year, and in 1992 it became a standardized test. Then in 1994 it was added to the DSM mental disorder list, or the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Before 2013, there was a much broader range of autistic classifications, as well as the general autistic condition, as in the early infantile autism, first termed by Leo Kanner, and Asperger's Syndrome. There was also Rett syndrome, which was more common in girls. It displayed difficulty with hand movement, clapping, loss of speech, balance, coordination, losing the ability to walk, breathing problems like apnea, hyperventilation, and extreme anxiety disorder. Also, there was pervasive developmental disorder. It was a very atypical type of autism, as in hard to distinguish, hard to identify it alongside infantile autism, Asperger's syndrome, and even childhood disintegrative disorder. Basically, it involved a lot of delays with development of the senses and with communication and interaction. There was language barriers because that was very underdeveloped. Yet, these young children who displayed these characteristics still develop normal. I'd say the most scariest out of them all was the childhood disintegrative disorder. Basically, imagine a young child learning and growing, developing its senses, skills in its early years, and then a few years down the line, all them skills digress. They pretty much disappear. We have to start from scratch again. That's basically what that disorder entailed. There was also pathological demand avoidance, basically characterizing children and young people struggling with the demands of everyday experiences to a very extreme level. And the term was first used by Elizabeth Ann Newson in 1980. However, in 2013, all different autistic classifications come under one big umbrella. Officially, the autism spectrum disorder. Despite how versatile the different autistic classifications appear, you are now observed on the level of support that you need, and there's 3 levels. Level 1 typically being the higher functioning mild type of autism. Level 2, it's much more substantial support, where there are much more indifferent, and the struggles are much more impactful to someone who's higher functioning and milder functioning. Level 3 is basically, it's the most extreme severity. People on level 3 will be in support, or they're entitled to support. They're likely to attend day services, residential, supported living, respite services, specific special educational needs, projects to help focus on building as much independent skills as possible to that person's ability and capacity. It's very cryptic getting your head around autism if it's not something you often confront. It's often misinterpreted, and there's a lot of skeptics out there in terms of how impactful it really is, in terms of the difficulties that they have. Could it be the case of just reinforcing them to help them adapt more to their surroundings, as opposed to reinforcing the environment, making adjustments for them to adjust better? Often described as somebody who has issues with socializing with people, don't communicate very well like regular everyday people do. Even their imagination of things is not on the same level. They seem to have odd eccentric interests, or very obsessive behaviors, repetitive in nature. It's very common for anyone on the spectrum to have really impressive strengths, and their weaknesses, they really, really lack the ability to perform at those things. Obviously, whoever you speak to on the spectrum will give you their own perspective. It varies from different person to different person, but from my experience, I've got Aspergers Syndrome. I'm technically level 1 autism. Basically, I think of it as, if I was to describe it to somebody, I'd mention a lot about development is a key thing in terms of how well I perform doing something I perform strong in, as opposed to something I perform weak in. Usually, over time, I've built up enough momentum to understand something as it is, how it's supposed to operate, how it's supposed to be. I've had that time to develop my awareness of something, but I don't think at any point in my life have I ever been an intuitive thinker. There are things I can latch onto straight away. The only reason why I can latch onto it straight away is because I've had the time to actually process. I've had the time to actually get to know what it's about. anything that's thrown at me first time of asking will present a problem. As I transition is such a kicker sometimes. Unfamiliar surroundings do present anxieties, not because they're scary places, it's because I'm not prepared for what's about to happen. If I don't have an insight into what's coming up, I haven't got a clue what I'm going to expect. And that can be very hard to deal with. Basically, somebody who doesn't have autism or a disability that has similarities to it, basically, you're a much more intuitive thinker. If something drops on you at any point, you're able to be very resilient and just get on with it, whatever that is, even if it's something you've never confronted before, ever. You don't even necessarily have had to have ever faced anything like it before. You can just latch onto it and just go with it. For me, if I don't have an insight, if I don't even have an inch of an insight into something that I am facing, there is high pressure building up inside of me. It's a horrible place. I do try to keep a headstrong mentality to confront, what is, I understand this world is very, very complicated. That's one thing you're never told when you're younger. You're expected to just go along with it. When you get to a certain point where you develop your own sense of identity, if you're even able to get to that stage. There's a lot of things that we're not prepared to face, yet it just happens. But people who do not present difficulties, where they have issues with change, transition, things not being as familiar as what they used to, just how they just go along with it. There's happy-go-lucky people out there, not in a bad way. You do have an advantage if you are an intuitive thinker. You can just go with it when it's just right in front of you and you've never even experienced anything like it before. For me, it presents a problem if I don't know what I'm facing. And it's not just one thing, it's like anything. Literally, learning how to read a book, learning how to ride a bike, learning how to throw a ball, learning how to tie a shoelace, learning how to cross a road, learning how to greet people, say hello, get to know somebody, learning a subject at school, learning a skill to put something mechanically together, something that involves an operation of any sort. Understanding what you're consciously aware of, understanding what you're subconsciously aware of, what could you unconsciously be aware of that might actually be out there, but you're not actually faced with it in its physical form. I could go on all day. There's so many things, but you get the gist of what I'm going on about. Well, at least I hope you do. Areas of interest that I may have strengths in is basically because maybe I've had the opportunity to form a connection with it. If I didn't form a connection with it, would it be an area of my interest? If it's not been long enough, if it's not been there long enough in my environment, would I have a strong interest in it? Something kick-started it right from the beginning. Things like repetitive behavior and obsessions, I do have a lot of things I'm obsessed with or that I repeat. If I really like something, it will repeat over and over and over again in my head. It can be intrusive. Intrusive thoughts is often understated, I feel, as well. It's not a mental game, it's not a mental block. It's like you've got all these different things going on around you, yet you're so obsessed with these same specific things. You're not absorbing every single thing in the environment. That is very, very overwhelming, especially if there's lots of things going on around you. Imagine there's thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of things potentially going on around you. Yeah, I could only be obsessed with maybe, 2 or 3 of those things. Those are the things I'm going to go away and think about at the end of the day. I had a much more impactful connection with those things. There's lots of things in the world I have no idea what's going on yet. I can do it in a Rubik's Cube, I can juggle, I can skip. I can flip myself upside down, flip myself forward on gymnastic rings. Those things I've mentioned I've built an obsession with. I've maybe built an obsession with it is because I've learned how the process works. I'm attracted to the idea of when I understand how a pattern works. I appreciate it a lot more. I don't absorb anything unless I know how something works. Once it gets to that stage, it's inside me. Without that, it goes in one ear and goes out the other ear. It's quite frustrating, especially if it could be beneficial to my life. Relationships with people. I have no problem whatsoever with people. I was brought up to be a reasonable, humble human being. I was not put on a pedestal. I've known living people. I have living people, close people in my life. I've met people who I've considered good people. I've even met so many enemies. There's people I don't like. There's people that don't like me. There's people that even hate me. I'm even capable of hate. But specifically, I've got to experience different types of people in my life. But one consistent thing that's always remained, I've never truly had a natural connection with anyone, nobody. It's not a bad thing or a disrespectful thing. The people I like, I generally like. But in terms of how I have developed as a person, I do not naturally connect with anyone. But I have learned how to coexist with people to retain those good relationships with who I possibly can do that with and share those moments with. But in terms of my thought process, I am on my own with that. I am not affiliated with anyone. My thoughts are my thoughts. Even for those people who may consider me a good person, who may even respect me, it's awkward if we cannot connect. And it's a very common thing when somebody is in the presence of me. I know when I walk into a situation, the dynamic changes. And it's not always in the best way. But I have the ability to do that effortlessly. If it's somebody I like and I generally respect, it's disheartening. It really is disheartening. But I've learned how to live with it and keep a strong head about it. Because there's no other way. Otherwise, I may as well just give up on everything. So basically, you get the gist of what my life is about. I'll have to go into more specific detail in another episode. Otherwise, this is going to be way too long. But yeah, autism is not just about... Well, it isn't just in essence about somebody who's poor at socializing and communicating. It's much deeper. There's a developmental difference that I have that somebody who is not autistic will never experience. Away from all of that, if you want to look at autism for what it actually is, it's basically I have a much more stronger identity with my inner self than the outside world. I don't naturally have a connection with anything externally, nothing in the outside world. I've just had to have time to develop awareness and understanding how to navigate myself around and coexist in situations to get by, to survive, to grow, to feel, to experience, to live, even to love. I'll leave it here for now. But if you have listened to this, thank you very much for your time. And I will go into more detail of specific situations another time. But for now, take care of yourself. I'll see you soon.